Hi everyone, this is a presentation for EDUC 5005, Leading Professional Learning, Assignment 2 for Southern Cross University's Master of Education. My name is Ananais Kurundondo, student ID 237675008. This presentation looks at professional learning at X State School, a remote indigenous state school at the north of Queensland. The structure of this presentation looks at problems on of professional learning at X State School. There will be a short analysis of professional learning issues. Given the time limit for the presentation, there will be a brief overview of the issues pertaining to indigenous learning behavior, while there will be some short discussions on few literatures to argue on the need for professional learning at X State School. There will be a few recommendations to improve professional learning at the school with tools to measure the success of the strategies before concluding the presentation. Now, we will look at the school profile as mentioned earlier. X State School is a remote indigenous state school north of Queensland with a student population of 240 students. The school population is 99% indigenous with a 100% non-indigenous teaching staff. There are indigenous teaching staff, support staff at the school. The school has an ICSIA school value on my school of 685, which means it is way below the average of 1,000 as presented on my school. The professional learning issues. Hughes, Moore, and Williams 2004 discuss about aspects of Aboriginal culture that has to be considered for indigenous remote communities such as X State School. Like many other mainstream education institutes who rely more on empirical evidence available that generalizes education for all, X State School practices these generalized standards. One thing that we do not have at the moment is the need to consider culturally appropriate management strategies as suggested by Weinstein, Tomlinson, and Tomlinson, Clark, and Curran 2004. Some other professional learning issues pertaining to X State School looks at the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership Standards, or AITSL 2021, looking at the standard that has to be practiced by all teachers. There is also a need to look at a suggestion by Griffiths 2011 of the need to appreciate Aboriginal learning behavior. Now, Llewellyn, Boone, and Lithwaite 2018 discuss about effective behavior management strategies for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. And they mention, and I quote from page 14, on student behavior and engagement will improve when staff work in indigenous way. A quote from Raman 2010, Yukaponta and McGinty 2009, which is cited in Llewellyn, Boone and Lithwaite 2018, page 14. They also mention the schools implementing culturally appropriate professional development. And that leads us to CRCM, which is Culturally Responsive Classroom Management by Weinstein, Tomlinson, Clark, and Curran 2004. Uh, I'm using this CRCM on this presentation as a ruler to measure how X school is performing. And it is used to measure against the performance of X State School professional learning methods that is undertaken to improve teaching and learning at the school. The implementing of culturally appropriate professional development is lacking in the school, although it continues to acknowledge the first people on these lands, but it does not fully reflect this in practice. The culturally responsive classroom management looks at the analysis of professional learning at a state school. Weinstein, Tomlinson, Clark, and Curran 2004 noted that we cannot assume that our teacher graduates will develop CRCM on the job. So there is a need to infuse this strategy into them. There is a need to train teachers on culturally responsive classroom management, especially in a community school or in an indigenous state school such as X-State School. This includes the localized context of knowledge of students' cultural background, the awareness of the broader social, economic, and political context pertaining to the locality of teaching and learning. The question of what are the culturally appropriate management techniques that needs to be implemented on a school such as X-State School. And there needs to be a commitment to build caring classrooms and communities. Again, referring to Hughes, Moore, and Williams 2004 Aboriginal ways of learning. How can we implement professional learning in an Indigenous community school such as X-State School, which brings back the reason why I have indicated ICSEA value at the beginning of this presentation. Now, Llewellyn Boone 2015 noted some areas that we need to look at so that we improve teaching and learning. And to improve teaching and learning, there has to be some professional learning undertaken at the school, which is localized, that looks at cultural behaviors, learning patterns, relationship with Indigenous students, culturally aware reactive behavior support, and the understanding of Aboriginal worldviews and ways of learning. Now, literature review. We will briefly look at some literatures that supports the need for professional learning for an Indigenous community school such as X-State School, so that teachers are fully supported in this area, so that implementation of teaching and learning programs in the school streamlines to the understanding of culturally responsive classroom management. The first one is the understanding of Aboriginal worldviews, as suggested by Hughes, Moore, and William 2004. The next one, teacher standard as outlined by the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership 2021. How teachers adhere to the standards requirement of the Australian education system. Griffith 2011 argued about the appreciation of Aboriginal learning behavior, stating that so much has been said and so much has been discussed with good intentions of the need to improve the education of Indigenous students, But Griffith suggested that so very little evidence has been provided for a competing program that specifically targets the needs of the indigenous students. That brings us to Llewellyn Boone and Lathwaite's 2018's effective behavior management strategies that looks at indigenous student support. And also, they mention about implementing culturally appropriate professional development that needs to be delivered to all teachers, especially for community schools that targets that serves indigenous students such as X State School. Llewellyn, Boone, and Lathwaite 2018 looks at competing theories and empirical evidence for indigenous students support. Again, as been said by Griffith 2011, there is so much has been said, but very little evidence that shows competing programs that supports indigenous education. It leaves a lot to wonder why indigenous schools continue to underperform, which is one of the reasons why I presented the ICSEA school value at the beginning of this presentation, to see how the school is performing, which has been a picture portrayed for so many years, and I hope there will be some improvement should the leadership team taking into account the need to educate our teachers on culturally responsive classroom management skills. Professional learning strategies that needs to be implemented at X State School. I would propose that X State School has a problem that needs to be solved. This requires problem-solving skills, which has to be led by the school leadership itself. So, Dinham 2016, page 158 stated, and I quote, emphasis on problem or issue-based learning and recognition of what is important with around identifying issues and potential solutions. So, how can we identify the problem and what are potential solutions? And it drives me into Friedman and Rogers 2009 journal, which they wrote that conceptual framework guiding leaders to make decisions for the purpose of learning. There needs to be some good action research for a school such as X State School to find out how we can improve teaching and learning in the school, how we can improve the standard of the school, how can we improve reading and writing, and most importantly, how can we improve behavior problems at the school. And this underlies on the need to improve professional learning at first, because teachers deliver and students are at the receiving end, and how we can manage this in a way that the students, while at the receiving end, are undertaking learning in a culturally appropriate environment. That leads to the understanding of essential skills for classroom management by Education Queensland. This is again a standard, a generalized standard, which is practiced by mostly all schools, I reckon. So I'm bringing this point on this presentation on the note that when we are leading professional learning, there needs to be localized data so that we have empirical evidence available to support teaching and learning theories that has to be implemented for a school such as X State School. A measurement of success, how can we measure the success of these recommendations? There needs to be school-based professional development or workshops. We all know that we have 20 hours of mandatory professional development implemented in schools. And if we can target problem-solving sessions in school, so that we develop a program for culturally responsive classroom management that will be implemented in hopes to improve teaching and learning at X State School. How can we measure this the success of this program? We use data, look at Trello behavior charts and see the reduction in behavior problems, and we see the improvements in reading level, writing level, and literacy and numeracy level of the school. And there needs to be a data on the mentoring of teachers so that there is the implementation program continues at the school. To conclude with this presentation, I would look at the provision of theory that is localized, as suggested by Friedman Rogers in 2009 on good research theory. Providing empirical evidence will assist positive behavior management practices that is culturally located. So X State School as an indigenous Aboriginal community needs to see that the students and the teachers in the state school are implementing programs in line with the cultural practices that is practiced in the community. Leadership team needs to practice the guiding principles of professional learning, but in a localized context. And I'm using focuses number 3 and number 5 of the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership 2021. Focus number 3 states leading improvement and innovation and change. How can we lead? How can we improve learning, and what innovative ideas do we have that will actually change the standard of the school broadly? And standard number 5, engaging and working with the community. How can we engage and work with the community to provide a culturally responsive school system that recognize the cultures of the indigenous people by looking at the number of students that we have in the school and the student population, which is mainly indigenous community. These are the reference for this presentation, and I thank you all for taking time to listen to this presentation. Thank you.